Cowboy Making Piece. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by Jay Dyess. Executive production and cover art by Julia Gussman. Charlene looked around at the packed sanctuary. Christmas Eve was her favorite day of the year, and the Christmas Eve candlelight service was her favorite church service. This year's service had been amazing, beautiful, and spiritual, and exactly what her soul needed to focus on Jesus and how he came to earth and what he did for mankind, and for her in particular. But she missed Charlie. It had been 2 years since she'd lost her husband. The sharp grief had faded. She still mourned him, but she was also lonely. More lonely this time of year and in this service than at any other. "Miss Charlene, do you have a minute to talk to me? I need some marriage counsel." Charlene turned. Rose Field stood at her elbow. Charlene's mind whirled. What would Rose need counsel for? Charlene had known right from the beginning that she and Derek were perfect for each other. She'd planned that silly newlywed contest explicitly for the two of them. Was it possible she could have been wrong and they weren't truly meant for each other? Were they going to go the way of so many marriages that didn't last more than a few years? Had Charlene miscalculated? "Let's go down to the basement where we'll have some privacy in the big Sunday school room." Charlene moved out of her pew, nodding to the people who greeted her. For a second, her eye caught on Charlie, the old cowhand who worked for Ford Hanson and lived above the stable. Humble and quiet, Charlie was the kind of man who would be perfect for Charlene's more outgoing and talkative personality. He had her values and morals, and she'd been thinking of introducing herself. It was a bonus that he had the same first name as her first husband, one of those God hints that she looked for and smiled about. But Charlie was a quiet guy, maybe some would even call him shy, and she'd be willing to bet that he'd been bitten once and would never think of approaching her, no matter how much he might want to. Of course, she had no idea if he'd even noticed her, let alone wanted to approach her. Charlie stood against the wall on the other side of the church, nodding while Tig and Ashley talked to him. As Charlene took a couple of seconds to look at him, thinking about how she knew they'd match perfectly together, but not sure of how to make that happen. It took some very special skills to matchmake oneself. He seemed to feel her gaze and his eyes lifted, moving across the church and meeting hers. She'd been caught staring, but she didn't look away, holding his gaze until his face reddened under his tanned skin, along the edges of his white beard, and he jerked his gaze away. Oh, he was so adorable, a manly man who wasn't a ladies' man, who'd be loyal and hardworking and have all the old-fashioned ideas of protecting women and giving them deference and all the chivalry that was dead in the rest of America, the stuff she loved. Unfortunately, that also meant that he'd need to be the one to approach her. If only. "Charlene?" Rose stood in the side aisle, waiting. "I'm coming." She made her way downstairs slowly, stopping several times to talk to people and wish them a Merry Christmas. When they asked about her plans, she hedged, because she really didn't have any. She'd been invited to several places to eat, but she hadn't given a firm commitment to any. "Do you want to grab some punch before we go to the Sunday school room?" Rose asked. That seemed like an odd request, and Charlene shook her head. She'd get something after she came back out, after she was done talking to Rose about whatever marriage issues she had. But when they made it back to the Sunday school room, Katie and Flynn Powers stood next to the back row of desks, like it was them who wanted to talk to her. "Miss Charlene," Flynn said, looking relieved, "I'm so glad you're here. Remember that kissing schedule you gave us when we were married?
Yes, of course I do.
Surely they didn't hold that against her. Just in case they did, she said.
It was for your own good.
I know it was. It's just that you said when it was time to go into the bedroom and close the door, if we had any questions about what to do, we were supposed to see you.
I just said that. I knew you two knew what to do.
Well, I have questions, Flynn said in his serious accountant's way. Charlene's stomach dropped. She'd been being facetious. She hadn't expected them to take her up on it.
Well, after you're done answering him, maybe you'd have a minute to talk to me. I want to know why you pushed me into watching Armstrong's Children.
Glory Baldwin stepped in front of her, hands on her hips.
I thought you and Armstrong were happy together,
Charlene managed to say. They'd looked happy during the service, but Charlene knew people could sometimes pretend to feel things they really didn't. And if there's time, I want to talk to you about the plumbing and electrical work that had been sabotaged in the cabin I was working on when Bellamy ended up staying with me. Calhoun Powers stood with his arm around his beautiful wife, a stern look on his face. Charlene nodded weakly. That could get her arrested. On Christmas, no less. What was the statute of limitations for small crimes in North Dakota? Silas Powers, holding hands with his wife, Gladys, strode to the other side of his brother, Calhoun, facing Charlene. I'd like a word with you as well. I understand you might have influenced Gladys's parents to put an age stipulation in her inheritance. Charlene opened and closed her mouth.
I can explain.
Nolt Powers, the oldest of the Powers brothers, appeared at Silas's side, his wife Shasta, looking petite and almost childlike beside him. I thought it was odd that the town didn't come together better for Shasta when she was sick. I have some questions for you, too.
Well, it's like this.
Charlene tried to marshal her arguments. He had a valid point, and she really didn't have much of an excuse. Coleman Baldwin pushed in, his wife, Sadie, squeezing in between her brothers, Silas and Nolt. I understand you did a deliberate misdirection with my wife, and I think you have some explaining to do. While you're explaining things, you can explain them to me. You messed with my life without my permission. Bryce Shaker's face was serious, while his wife, Peyton, who hardly ever looked perturbed, seemed upset.
But you thanked me,
Charlene exclaimed. It was not pleasant to have so many people standing against her. She hadn't been expecting this. She should have quit matchmaking a long time ago. And you turned me down. I think you owe me an apology. Dwight Eckenrode, his arm around Orchid, his wife, spoke up from where he stood behind the far row of desks. Well, I, for one, would like to thank you. You matched me up with my daughter and the love of my life. Brawley Powers grinned from the corner on her right, his hands on the shoulders of his wife, who beamed.
Finally, you're welcome.
Charlene couldn't disguise the relief she felt.
But you could have just told us rather than being so underhanded about it,
his wife added while Brawley nodded.
And you convinced my husband to lie to me.
Lavender Hart crossed her arms over her chest while her husband, Thaddeus, stood beside her, his arms crossed as well, like everything he'd done was all Charlene's fault. Charlene looked around the room. 12 couples that she'd had some kind of hand in getting together. None of them looked very happy, except Brawley, who always looked happy.
Guys, I can explain.
Actually, we don't need you to. Nolt stepped forward. We actually all appreciate what you've done for us, although we also all feel like we need to even the score a little, so to speak. Charlene froze, wondering what, exactly, he meant. it sounded like he wasn't exactly angry, and maybe even appreciated what she'd done.
Rose said she wanted to talk to me about marital issues.
Charlene began.
Yours. I wanted to talk about your marital issues.
Rose stepped forward.
Tig, you can bring Charlie on in.
Tig stepped in, his hand on Charlie's arm, a baffled look on Charlie's face. We all got together and decided there would never be any way we could pay you back for your kindness, Nolt began. So we decided to do the next best thing. We decided to pass it on. Calhoun's face held no trace of humor. So, Charlene, you and Charlie are going to spend Christmas right here, locked in the Sunday school room together. Nolt nodded to Silas and Dwight. These two put a fridge in here and stocked it with food and drink. There's a restroom in the back, and we've provided you with blankets and 2 air mattresses. We expect you to use them both. Nolt might have smirked, but the expression was gone so fast, Charlene might have imagined it. Any questions? Calhoun asked, standing shoulder to shoulder with Nolt. Charlene slowly shook her head, thinking that this idea was actually rather brilliant, and she didn't know why she didn't think of it herself. Sorry to do this to you, Charlie, but we're pretty sure you'll be thanking us next year this time, Nolt said, smacking the old guy on the shoulder as Tig brought him closer. Charlie didn't say anything, but his face was as red as Charlene had ever seen it. She actually kind of pitied him, but she was too busy realizing that this was the opportunity she had been longing for just a few minutes ago.
You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Her words were soft, humble, and full of gratitude. Nolt lifted a hand like it was nothing, put his arm around his wife's shoulders and walked out with her. Everyone filed out slowly, giving her a smile or a thumbs up for Charlie and a few saying Merry Christmas. Brawley winked and smirked. Finally, the last person left and the door closed behind them, the lock clicking into place. Well, Charlie said, scratching his head, his face still red. I'm not sure what that was about, but I can try to see if I can break some glass and get us out of here.
Do you really think we should do that? Surely they'll let us out tomorrow,
Charlene said. Do you really not mind being stuck here with me all day on Christmas? Charlie asked, sounding incredulous. Charlene hesitated. She didn't want to appear too eager. Then she decided she'd just be honest.
I can't think of anything I'd like better.
Charlie's eyes got big, then a slow grin lit up his face. Charlene put her purse on the nearest desk and loosened her coat. She'd take it off and lay it over her purse. After all, she wouldn't want Charlie to have any reason to see the keys in it, especially the gold key with the green ribbon, since it was the spare key to the Sunday school room door, and she didn't want to have to explain why she didn't offer to use it to unlock the door and let them out. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like, or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.